everybody. I'm Suzette Standring, and welcome to It's All Right with Suzette. And the marvels of modern technology have virtually transported us to the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum. And it's a fitting place because of our special guest, Fred Berry, attorney of Milton, now living in Duxbury. And we're going to be talking about the book, The Gardner Heist, which is the 2013 selection for the Milton Reads community-wide reading project, where everyone in town is encouraged to read The Gardner Heist, the true story of the world's largest unsolved art theft. And it's written by Ulrich Bosner. And it has very surprising ties to Milton, to Braintree, to Boston. It mentions Whitey Bulger and all kinds of interesting people and notorious figures. And one of them is Myles Connor, who was raised and grew up in Milton. And he is mentioned as one of the main suspects in the Gardner Heist, and that if he didn't do it, then he knows who did. A very colorful and interesting character. And Fred Berry is here with us today to give us an inside peek into that person. And he's going to give us a lot of information that, and believe me, this book is very extensive and talks a lot about all the people involved in the Gardner Heist, all the suspects, from defense attorney's perspective and the police and investigations and interviews with main suspects, including Myles Connor. And so Fred's here today because at one time he represented Myles Connor, and he's going to talk with us today. Fred, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Suzette. It's truly a pleasure to come back to my hometown. As I said to my wife when we moved to Duxbury a year and a half ago, that I won't live long enough to have another hometown. This will always be my hometown, and I miss it. I truly do. The only thing I don't miss, as I mentioned to you, is the 3 light cycles to get through East Milton Square this morning. That's just why I was a couple of minutes late. But, you know, I lived with that for a long time. I only notice it now because I don't live with it anymore. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be back here to talk about my friend Myles. I called him last night to make sure that I was okay with revealing certain things, and he's wide open. He's a great guy, and he said, sure, you can, say what you know. And I only know because he told me, his involvement or his discussions about it. And clearly he's been connected to the Gardner Museum heist since day one. Exactly. Even though he was in prison and could not have pulled the job, they did suspect him of orchestrating it from inside.
Yes.
Which isn't the case. Anyway, you go ahead. I could go on forever, but I want to do it your way.
You're a very long-time respected attorney in Milton. How did you come to know Myles, and in what way did you represent him?
Well, that's an interesting question, how I came to know him, because I've known Myles since grammar school or elementary school, whatever you want to call it, where for a while we were both at Tucker School. I can remember my earliest memory of Myles, and because of our last names, I sat near him. We were seated alphabetically. And I was sitting behind Myles one day when I don't know what we were in, 4th, 5th grade, I suppose, when he took a baby alligator out of his pocket. In those days, you could buy an alligator simply through a comic book or funny book ad for a half $1 or $1. And he had a 4 or 5 inch alligator that he brought to school with him. And I knew he was an unusual person then and there. So did the little girl in front of him, who he scared the bejeepers out of with his alligator. But I also knew, and I never forgot, that Myles was an animal lover. And I knew him in a way that you get to know someone when you're very young. And I just, when he was accused of violent crimes, I just knew it wasn't him. The Spinney case and the time he was convicted of rape, both the times he was convicted of violent crimes, they were quickly overturned on retrial.
Yes, he was
acquitted on those charges. And as I followed them, he was ultimately acquitted. And as I followed him, I knew in my heart that he hadn't committed them. Myles was a notorious art thief, and he dealt drugs, and he robbed banks. He did all those things, but he was never a violent person. Ironically, he's basically a very honest person. When Myles tells you something, you know it's the truth. And therefore, it was easy to catch him, because he would always believe a police officer that was working a sting on him. When he was in Kentucky and somebody asked him to buy them drugs, Myles, if you tell the truth, you assume other people are telling the truth. So very, very clever in what he did, legal and illegal, very, very bright, capable guy. I mean, I didn't know that he would someday be a member of Mensa, that he had an IQ of 160 or 65, whatever. But I did know that he was very bright even in grammar school. Could have done anything in life. Very talented, very strong. Studied martial arts, so he was very agile and athletic. Very talented musician. He could be what he wanted to be.
But he chose to be a criminal.
Yeah, it's interesting to, it's interesting to try to analyze why. And I've gotten to know Myles pretty well. We both have that Irish-American heritage where we're somewhat familiar with each other's character because of it. And Myles committed crime, as he'd freely admit, for what the Irish call for the crack. It was a C-R-A-I-C, it's a Gaelic term, which basically means for the fun of it, for the heck of it, for the thrill, for the adrenaline. His first notable crime, perhaps his first crime, period, because he was a pretty straight kid and a great guitar player, a singer. He did a lot of professional performances from age 14 on. But at about 18 or 19, he entered the Forbes Museum shortly after it opened and relieved them of some Far Eastern art. And that might have been his first offense, and probably was a source of great, adrenaline thrill, as we said.
Yeah, the Forbes Museum heist is mentioned in the Gardner heist book. There's a lot about art theft and all. In this book, they talk a lot. It's very extensive about the heist, the various suspects. Fred, can you offer up something that may not be, I know you read this book, what might you tell us about Myles or about the Gardner heist that isn't included in this book?
Well, I just finished reading the book, and it seemed like, most of what I know is in there. It was very well researched, but it indicates, and it's true, that about 20 years, a long time before the actual heist, Myles had been a visitor on many occasions to the Gardner Museum. And it was for two reasons, I suppose. By then he was a museum, he had invaded a number of museums. He had stolen from museums. So I'm sure that was in the back of his mind, but he primarily went because of his love of art. He was a great, honestly, a connoisseur of fine art, something taught to him by his paternal grandfather. It had come down from his grandfather and great-grandfather. He has a wonderful collection of Eastern Asian antiques, swords, samurai swords, for example. So when he originally went to the Gardner Museum, he went as anyone else would to appreciate the artwork, and he knew far more about the artwork than most people. He knew virtually everything about it. Myles always had a cocky way about him, and I don't know if this is in the book or not, but when he first was aware they were focusing on him as a suspect, he said, "You should have known it wasn't me. I'd have taken the Titian." He always cocky, always with a quick answer. But also true. The Titian was the finest piece there and the most valuable.
Yes, it says that in the book about how if he would have taken Europa.
Sure, and he would have. The thing that occurred to me right away as I read this book and other books is that while the plan was very professional and the execution to a point was quite professional, at some point it all breaks down. At some point it wasn't Myles Connor because they abused these fine artworks. One of them was cut with a razor knife from its frame. Others were abused by being hammered from their frame. Myles would never have done that. Myles would have handled these fine artworks with the loving, the loving care that you would handle a kitten or a small child with. He loved the artwork so much. So if you were paying close attention, you'd know right away it wasn't Myles, not the way these works were abused. And my guess is that initial abuse probably carried on, and it's hard for me to imagine that after 20 years they have any value, because it was professional to a point and then very unprofessional in the execution and the abuse of the artworks and in probably what happened since.
But he probably knows, do you think that he realistically knows who did it?
Oh, sure. He's quite certain that he knows who did it. Whether he's right or not is a separate question. He talked to a guy named Houghton, who we knew from childhood, the big guy that's referenced many times in the book.
That's right.
Bobby Donati, he had done some work with, some illicit work. And he's pretty convinced that they're the ones that pulled it because they basically followed a script that he had laid out 20 years earlier. He had a plan that whether or not he had plenty of chances to have done it. He was on the outside more than on the inside. He could have robbed the museum, and he had a plan to do it. And what they did was pretty much spot on with his plan, even to the police uniforms and the way they did it. So he's quite certain he knows who did it. We can't confirm it. Both these guys are deceased now, one naturally, one not so naturally. Myles believes it's them. Does he know for certain? No, he doesn't know for certain. He just believes it in his heart because Mr. Houghton visited him while he was still alive and told him they did it. So he believes it. He also believes that he knows what happened to them, and I asked him last night, is it okay for me to talk about that? Because I won't if you don't give me permission. And he said, sure, you can go ahead and tell them that Myles is fairly certain, again, can he produce facts? I doubt it. Fairly certain that he knows the guy in New York who shipped them out to the Far East. I said, Myles, there's a lot of talk in the book about some of it having gone to Ireland. He said, no, none of it's in Ireland. And he has a certain certainty about the way he handles it. I think he has some probably street knowledge, and no more than that.
Because, you know, when they talk about spiriting the art away to Ireland, they're talking about also the possible involvement of Whitey Bulger.
Right.
And so therefore Myles say that that wasn't the case, that he thinks that it was Houghton. He believes that it was Houghton and that the art was actually sent to the Middle East?
Yeah, the Middle East is as best as he can narrow it down. And once you identify the Middle East, you're also saying that we'll probably never get it back. I mean, it would be a tough place to investigate. So Myles doesn't believe it'll ever be brought back. He believes it's in the Middle East, but no more specific than that. And when I asked him about Ireland, he said, absolutely not. It's not in Ireland.
Oh, interesting.
Now, is that factual or is it his guess? Maybe it's his guess, but his guess is a lot more intelligent than mine would be, given his background, you know.
Well, Fred, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, Fred's going to give us more insider information on what is going on now with Myles and more about the heist. So stay tuned. Welcome back with Suzette and Mr. Fred Berry, longtime attorney, and he knows Myles Connor very well, and he's going to be giving us information because the Milton Reed's selection this year is the Gardner Heist. And that museum theft took place in 1990, so that's been a lot of years. And so since that time, you've stayed in touch with Myles. First of all, why did you come to represent him? Was it a civil matter?
Yeah, it was purely civil. What I represent, Myles had many good attorneys. Marty Leppo represented for many years. He's had a lot of good lawyers. My representation of Myles was purely civil on a matter involving a home that he lives in down in where he lives in. And I've advised him on a number of things since I rekindled the friendship, but that's only in the last year or so. So I went from childhood of being a friend to watching him from afar, meaning in the newspapers, basically, all the years, and then in recent years rekindled the friendship, really. And I was really happy that I did. You know, Myles is now 70 years old. He's had a heart attack and a stroke.
I understand in the book he was in a coma for a while.
Yeah, in the book he says if the right score came along, would he go back? But in truth, that's not likely. It's extraordinarily unlikely that he'd ever do anything criminal again. He doesn't have the strength. You know, he's an older guy now. He's in some ways older than his years because of the disabilities of the heart attack and the stroke. So he's a gentle guy, still a rogue. I had him as a guest of mine at a banquet a couple of weeks ago for the Mystery Man dinner that happens with young Milton guys. Well, my era Milton guys, young. I made a mistake there. But and Myles came in, and it was as if I had bought royalty. The 75 or 80 people there all made occasion to come to the table to say hello. He spoke briefly and fascinated and amused and entertained everybody. So he's really, really an interesting and nice guy. It seems people will laugh when I say an honest guy, but you never have any sense talking to him that he isn't being 100% honest with you, even when it's not in his best interest, even when he's admitting...
very honest about his dishonesty.
Yeah, very honest about his dishonesty. And you ask him, I see Bernie Lynch out there. When you ask him about why on earth he got involved in all this, he can't really say. You know, he acknowledges the adrenaline, the crack, and all that. He could have done so many things. He was a superstar in a small world as a rock singer. But Fred,
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You know, there is the reality also that, you know, you talk about his passion and his, you know, eye for art. And, you know, there are many, many people who feel exactly the same way. You know, I mean, I don't know what it is. Sometimes I see great art in a museum and I'll just start crying. And I know that that's a very common reaction. So, you know, although we do talk about Myles in this way, there's also the side that is very dark, and that he has actually stolen something from the world that is really important, that it's completely vanished. For those future generations of art lovers, they'll never see the Sea of Galilee or Vermeer's The Concert and all of that. Does that ever trouble him in any way? Is there any remorse or guilt for that? Because that's a pretty big violation when you think about it.
well, you're right. But remember, he didn't take the Sea of Galilee. This wasn't
Right,
his
but I mean,
scam. Yeah.
But
Certainly, he
the
did remove
idea,
some work.
other things.
Yeah.
You know, he stole a priceless Rembrandt from
But
the
understand,
MFA.
when he stole the Rembrandt, it was to use as leverage to get himself out of jail. It was a chess game being played with the law, and he knew that would quickly be back in the possession of the of the Museum of Fine Art. And his personality comes out again in that theft, because he had used artwork that he had stolen as leverage before. And the DA, when they had him on this museum theft up in Maine, and they had him and they were planning to make a recommendation for a long sentence, the DA made a quick quip to him that says, "You'll need a Rembrandt to get out of this one." And Myles said, "Really?" And the plan was hatched that day. He knew there was a Rembrandt. He visited the Museum of Fine Arts all the time as an art lover.
Yes.
So within a short time, he had stolen the Rembrandt. Not to keep it, just to use it for leverage. He never would have, he would have wanted that artwork to be back in there. And understand something about Myles. Myles, maybe it's a rationalization, I suppose it is, but he thinks that most of the work you find in the modern museums isn't necessarily there rightfully. Much of it is the spoils of war. When the Germans took all the artwork for France, for example, in the Second World War, it didn't come back to its rightful owner necessarily. It circulated around the world from museum to private owner. He says a good deal. He thinks half of the works in modern art are stolen works, stolen in one way or other, the spoils of war or whatever. And the Rembrandts get stolen all the time. There's one in Europe that's been stolen 8 or 10 times. It always comes back. Just like that one did.
That's a very interesting perspective. Now, you know, Fred, you're a very successful lawyer, and you have met many, many people, many personalities through the years. And barring the fact that you knew Myles as a childhood friend, you know, you felt, I sense that there was actually something compelling about his personality, because obviously you're not friends with everybody you've ever met. So what is that on a very personal level?
Yeah.
What is that connection?
Without a doubt. Well, I did criminal defense, and only about 10% of lawyers ever do that. And a lot of people don't understand, because they basically stereotype criminals as all bad.
Yes.
Well,
I understand it completely. My ex-husband was a criminal lawyer, so I understand.
So you understand it, but not everybody does. You know, I've studied criminology undergraduate school. I took a master's degree in criminology, so I had a fascination with crime and criminology from the beginning.
Yes.
And I learned very quickly that criminals are people that have done something bad, but they aren't all bad. There's often more good than bad in most criminals. People that my wife used to come home and she'd see something working on my house, an electrician, a carpenter, and she'd say, "What did he do?" I said, don't ask. Because in truth, my clients became my friends. There was far more good in them than there was bad. I did a great deal of work on drunk driving, and that's the great crime for the non-criminal. Rarely is someone charged with drunk driving actually a criminal. So you get to know, you know, don't stop at the title criminal and not go beyond it. If you go beyond it, you often find a fascinating and worthwhile person. And boy, they love the fact that you went beyond it, and it's easy to become friends. Many of my clients became friends. Myles, he loved the expression that we're all actors on a stage. He kind of carved out a role for himself, or circumstance carved it out, and then he played the role very well. When the book talks about him being violent, it's simply not true. His bravado may have made him say, we beat up that guy, or I ordered that he be beat. That's a laudable on. Myles was just never a violent guy. He was in prison once for a rape that he didn't commit, and he didn't blame the girl. He identified him because the guy that did commit it was a relatively slight red-headed guy that looked a lot like Myles, and he understood how she could make a mistake. but he made sure that the guy confessed to it so he could get out. And in making sure, did they rough the guy up? I don't know, but I assure you he didn't. It was not his nature to be violent. People will say to me, well, he shot a cop. But you have to hear the whole story for Myles to understand that. He was about to die. He had been threatened by one of these police officers that if I ever get a chance, I'm going to kill you. So thinking he was about to die, in his mind it was a clear act of self-defense, and no one wants to hear that when you shot a police officer. But he had an agreement. Let's all put the weapons down. I'm going to turn and run, and then, hey, the chase is on. One of the officers agreed. They put their weapons down, and the other picked up and fired at him. He just said, it just missed my head. So he fired back, and he said, and when I fired back, he said, I made sure I shot him in the groin. It was actually the upper leg, where it would not be fatal. The officer later said, I understood that. I didn't hold it against him. So it's a strange world that he lives in, but Myles never wanted to hurt anybody. He's not a violent person, he never was. Nobody that loves animals with the intensity that he does is a violent person. He has 3 horses, 4 dogs, an emu, a bunch of chickens, a bunch of cats, a raccoon.
Now?
Yeah, now, in his home down in Blackstone, and a cobra, which is the reason I refused to go into the house.
I see, yeah. According to the book, he is passionate about reptiles. And he
Exotic
said that
animals,
in his words, had he not been a criminal, those were his words, he would be a herpetologist.
Very likely so, yeah. He loved exotic animals, snakes, poisonous reptiles, things like that, and he could befriend almost anything.
So how does he feel, you've been talking to him, how does he feel about all this attention? And, you mentioned something about a movie, Fred.
Yeah, he loves the attention, quite honestly. It's all he has left, is the attention. And there is a movie. I've recently reviewed the contract, and being a lawyer, and by nature a little cynical, I called the agent in New York to make sure this just wasn't an illusion. He said, no, it's not an illusion at all. And 2 to 4 months from now, and this was a month ago, he told me we'll begin casting for a movie on Myles's book, The Art of the Heist. And and I, be honest with you, Myles loves the attention. Basically, it's what he has left.
I see. Well, let's tell us a little bit about Myles' book. I understand you got it through Amazon. And,
yeah, The Art of the Heist is what the book is called. I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera or not. But it's a biographical sketch of Myles Connor. It's available on Amazon. I forget the price, doesn't matter. But an excellent book. It doesn't begin to tell all the stories that I know and that he's told me over lunches when he entertains me endlessly about some of the real stories. But it's a fascinating book about Myles Connor. If I can give you a quick story that captures
please.
Everything. He lives in Blackstone, a little town
in
on
Rhode
the Rhode
Island.
Island. No, it's in Massachusetts, but it's on the Rhode Island border, next to Woonsocket. And there's only one bank in town. And he used to go into the bank for purposes of changing money or getting money orders to pay bills, simple things. People do it every day. But once the bank manager realized who he was, they didn't really want him in the bank. And they told him not to come in anymore. And later, when he had to do something quick and forgot about that request, he went in to get a money order, and the banker had him charged with trespass. Interesting. So, in fact, I don't even know if that one's been resolved yet. But I said to him, Myles, I know you don't like this guy and having you charged, but pretend you're not Myles Connors for a minute, and you're a bank manager. Would you want Myles Connors hanging around your bank? And he started to laugh. He said, that's what Sue says. He says, you're right, I guess I wouldn't. Because that's part of his history.
Again, honest.
Yeah, being honest. But he's an interesting guy, a rogue, a charmer. You can't dislike the guy. You meet him, he's just a very, very likable human being. Extraordinarily intelligent, very talented.
What is his medical condition now? Is he frail or is he mobile?
It's hard to say frail. I don't think he's frail.
Yeah.
But he had a heart attack and a stroke, and the combination has left him with some long-term and even sometimes short-term memory problems. So at times he'll tell you a story he's told you before, but not often. He's pretty clear. In fact, I'm putting together what we hope is an outline for a speaking tour for him. Because honestly, he didn't have much time to develop Social Security credits over the years, and finding a way to just make a living. I hope the movie happens. It will be lucrative for him. But it'll.
What movie company was it? Do you know?
Annapurna.
Annapurna, yeah.
Annapurna. They did O Dark 30 and a few fairly famous movies.
Wow.
And we're hoping it happens, but you believe it when you see it.
Right,
They
exactly.
paid him quite a bit of money.
Road.
They paid him a fair amount of money for the rights to do it, for the rights to the book, so I know they're serious with the money they've already invested. But who knows? A lot of things happen between here and there, and if the movie happens, it'll be great for him. It'll bring life to the idea of a speaking tour.
Is he sober now? I mean, I know that he had a drug problem for a while.
He's sober. I said that to him once. I said, Myles, if you're going to be using drugs, I'm not hanging out with you. I just can't. And he said, don't worry about that. He kind of laughed at me. He said, it would kill me because I have a stent or a pacemaker or something like that. He said, the doctors told me if I took drugs, it would kill me. So I can't even if I want to, and he doesn't.
Well, you know, on the, my other question is, would you be able to help me have him on this show?
I'd love to. And I did say to him, I said,
Yes.
Myles, are you willing to come back to your hometown and be a guest? And he said, sure.
Really?
And as I said, honestly, Suzette, he enjoys the attention. And yeah, I guess we all do. We all enjoy attention. And, but for most of us, we have something else. In a sense, that's what all that he has now. The love of his animals and the attention that he gets given his fame or infamy.
Now, we only have a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to ask you this. What do you feel about people who would say, well, we're glorifying him, and it might, you know, it might have the unintended consequences of encouraging young people to follow that? What do you say to that, Fred?
Well, I understand it. I really do. And I wouldn't want to ever glorify what he did. All the positive comments I've made today are about him as a person and the positive things about him. I don't glorify. I mean, robbing banks is a terrible thing to do. Dealing in drugs is a terrible thing to do. Even stealing from museums, as much as he could rationalize it, is also a terrible thing to do for reasons that you suggested. You're taking beauty away from the world. But you know, and maybe that has the effect, I don't know. I don't know what the unintended consequences are of giving Myles all this attention. I just know that
well, I'm a believer in redemption.
Yeah.
I am a believer in redemption.
Well, that's a good point. He did pay the price.
He has done his time in prison and all of that, and certainly there could be something to be learned from all of this.
Yeah.
And we are very grateful. It's been a very exciting show, Fred. Truly,
Been a pleasure.
very exciting show. And you know, the Gardner Heist. Get it, read it. It's being sold at the library. There are multiple copies for borrowing at the Milton Public Library. You can buy them at a discount at the bookshop of the Friends of the Milton Public Library. And we have a couple of events. June 12th. There's the summer launch, the summer cookout for the launch of the Milton Reads Project. There's going to be an outdoor grilling with hot dogs and desserts for the entire family on Wednesday, June 12th. On June 18th, there's going to be a concert. It's going to be Four Guys in a Tuxedo, a swing concert, again, part of the Milton Reads project. And the Friends are sponsoring it, Friends of the Milton Public Library. We're really grateful so much to Fred Berry for being here today. I know your next stop is the Rotary, where you're the featured speaker today at the Rotary Lunch.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And for anyone that might be curious, I still practice law. I have a very small gentleman's practice out of an office in Sandwich. My old Milton number still works if any of my friends from Milton want to get in touch.
How can they get in touch with you, Fred? Do you have an email address?
Yeah, sure. fgbarry@aol.com. It's easy. My initials, fgbarry@aol.com. I keep the old Milton number, and I hook it up in Sandwich, 698-3770, I believe it was. So I do hear from a lot of my friends up here, and I enjoy it every time. Not so much for business, sometimes just to renew old acquaintances.
Well, you're very well known, and I know you had your own TV show here in Milton for 15 years.
For 15 years, yeah. We did a show right here in the studio for many, many years on Issues of the Week, or Dateline Milton, I think the last show was called. Initially, I worked with Phil Murray on a show called Issues of the Week. For about 15 years, we did a cable show, and it was a wonderful experience. I enjoyed it.
That's wonderful. Well, Fred, thank you so much for coming up from Duxbury and for your help in possibly getting Myles Connor to come to this show in the future. And, you know, we really thank you for being here. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see what happens. And in the meantime, get yourself a copy of The Gardner Heist and be part of the Milton Reads Project. So, goodbye and thanks a lot.